Okay, everything looks good on my end. All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, students, whatever you're watching this. This is AP Macroeconomics with me, Mr. McRitchie, and I'm going to be doing a full-on mock FRQ section in this video. Pulled up 3 FRQs, 1 long, 2 short. Go through all 3 problems. They cover... I picked stuff from all over the course. I haven't seen the grading responses for any of these 3 FRQs, and I haven't used them in class before, I don't think. Or if I have, I don't remember. So I'm going to go through them raw. I'm not going to know what the answers are inherently, but I'm going to hopefully figure it out. And I'm going to check my answers at the end. I'll be going through the questions as if I'm a student, but I'll be explaining my thought process as I'm doing it. Basically, I'll be like narrating what's going on in my head. I'll also cover some things like the timing of the free response section, how long you should spend, what you should do with the 10 minutes of reading time and stuff like that. I'll give you tips and pointers and things like that in that window. But yeah, that's going to be kind of it. Let me grab one thing off my computer real quick. Should have a timer as a thing I can use. Just looking for a 10-minute timer. Okay. Seeing if I can just sort of... Yeah, that looks like a little work. I'm just checking everything on mine. Okay. See, I'll get started here in about a minute, but I have, I will warn you in this video, I picked kind of some doozies. I picked some fairly, I would call these hard FRQs. Like if I saw them on your AP exam, I'd be like, oof, bummer. It's not that they ask you to do tons of things that are insane, it's that they ask you to do a lot of things kind of all at once. So I'll explain everything as we go through it. There's a couple things at the beginning of the long FRQ that are a bit tricky. It somehow gets a little easier as you go, but I didn't pull any punches. I'll say that. I don't think I gave anyone a very easy FRQ for these 3. I think the 3rd FRQ is kind of doable, but the first one is for sure really hard. Okay. All right. As I looked at this, I was like, oh, what's this stuff? Okay. So here's where we get started. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you guys watch this. FRQs, here we go. On the AP Macroeconomic exam, you have you have 2 portions. You've got multiple choice portion, which is 70 minutes for 60 multiple choice questions. For those of you in my class, that's about the timing of our tests. We did about 32 to 34 questions in 40 minutes was our timing, which is about the same pace. So if you felt rushed in class, you will feel rushed on the test. If you felt it was about right, you'll feel it's about right. The free response section, we couldn't do a real mock in class because the timing of it is 60 minutes, and we don't have 60 minutes in a class period. It's 60 minutes for a total of 3 free response questions. You have a long FRQ and 2 short FRQs. Now, the 60 minutes is technically split up into 10 minutes of reading time and 50 minutes of writing time. It's important to know you can start answering questions during the reading time. You don't have to wait for that first 10 minutes to start writing stuff. Like, you can go nuts. I am going to solve through these problems as if I'm on that sort of 10-50 split, because I'll show you what I would use the reading section for. It's a personal suggestion and personal preference for me. I can't enforce you to do it, but I do recommend it because I teach the class and I'm pretty good at this stuff, so I probably know what I'm talking about. So let's look at the first FRQ, and there's a warning earlier in the video. I picked hard FRQs for this, so if you look at this and feel overwhelmed, I thought so too when I saw it. So, nope, wrong camera. There it is. Found it. Here we go. Now this is a poorly laid out FRQ. Sometimes they're laid out like this, which is great. The first one is not like that. I don't know why. Probably just to bother any of us with OCD. So I'm going to move my head out of the way so you can at least answer the first chunks of it, but I'll show you what my 10-minute reading time would look like. So let's imagine the timer starts at 4:32. Okay, So I see Skeeterville's economy is in short-run equilibrium with a recessionary gap of about $240 billion. I am just marking stuff as I go here. If I was you, I'd be like underlining or circling. I would see recessionary gap, $240 billion. A marginal propensity to save of 0.25. Expected inflation rate, don't see that very often, as 0.4. And the natural rate of unemployment is 2%. Oh boy, they gave me like 4 numbers. That's a lot of stuff to deal with here. Things I already know off of that first sentence. I know I'm going to have to do some multiplier stuff because they gave me the MPS. I know my Phillips curve is involved because they mentioned the natural rate of unemployment. And the expected inflation rate is typically also tied to the Phillips curve. Okay, so we've got A. Based on the Phillips curve model, this is my reading time still. I see Phillips curve, I underline it. I'm ignoring the question. Assume the government takes no policy action. Okay, what'll happen to the actual rate of unemployment in the long run? Terrifying. How will the long run adjustment process be represented in the Phillips curve model? Also terrifying. Assume that instead of waiting for it, they decide using fiscal policy to address the recessionary gap of $240 billion. If the government chooses to increase its deficit spending, and they're increasing it, calculate the minimum change in government spending required to increase aggregate demand by the amount of the recessionary gap. Show my work, okay. How will that be represented on the Phillips curve? Okay. If the government chooses to decrease income taxes instead of increasing its spending, calculate the minimum change in income taxes required to increase aggregate demand by the amount of the recessionary gap. All right. Now, suppose instead they want to maintain a balanced budget and increases both government spending and income taxes by $200 billion. Okay. How it'll affect the output gap. This is going to mess up when I scroll. I apologize for this. When the government chooses to implement the policy action in Part C, loanable funds market, this actually works for a highlighter. And then what's going to happen to the price of previously issued bonds and capital stock? Oh my God. There's a lot of stuff here. Okay. Reading time still going on. You can see all 3 FRQs all at once. So I'm going to go to the next one. I'm barely even processing what the question's asked. I just have important things marked on my paper. Second one, I see math. I don't like that. I'm not going to highlight the whole table. I know that's important. I need real GDP per capita. Okay, it says year 2. That's important. They have the same velocity of money. Who has the higher money supply? Calculate inflation rate, again in year 2. Nominal interest rate is the same for both. Who has a higher real interest rate? Okay, not in year 2 again. And then if the expected inflation rate was 10%, what would be the effect on real GDP as the economy adjusts to its long-run equilibrium? Again, hate to see long-run equilibrium as a question. It means they're asking for the long-run self-adjustment. And then the third question, just highlighting through some stuff here. The central bank of the country of Sewell sells bonds on the open market. Okay, they have no excess reserves. What will be the effect of the action on the amount of customer loans that banks in Sewell can make? Okay, money market graph, nominal interest rate. What is the effect of the central bank's action on each of the following? Price level and real interest rate. Okay. And then given the answer, how is the international value of the currency, the ONO, affected? ONO is a great currency name here because the entire FRQ section for this exam would have been a whole bunch of oh god, oh no. I don't know if your AP exam FRQ section would be this hard. I purposefully picked ones that I thought were kind of hard. At least when I looked at them were kind of hard. I haven't gone through the answers yet, but that's a lot of stuff. So I haven't answered any questions yet. It has been a total of 4 minutes. I know a bunch of things that they're asking about, so like pause my timer. I know that this AP exam is asking you to at least sort of visualize or draw the Phillips curve, the aggregate demand supply curve, the money market, and the foreign exchange market, and the loanable funds market. All of those have been referenced in some way, shape, or form on these questions. The only graph that really hasn't been is the production possibilities curve. I know in question 2, there's some math I got to deal with. I know I've got to find real GDP per capita and inflation rate. I've got formulas for those, so that's good. I know on this first question, they asked about the minimum change in spending, and they referenced the MPS. So I know there's a spending multiplier thing going on. It mentioned changing taxes also. That means tax multiplier is going to be involved as well. And there's a lot of stuff with the Phillips curve early on. Okay. I see fiscal policy. I saw monetary policy in the last question. I also saw foreign exchange market stuff in the last question. So I know all the stuff that I gotta have to like have in the Rolodex of my brain kind of ready to go. Sort of like, okay, I got all this stuff. Let's go back to the first question now. So, based on the Phillips curve model. Now, this question was technically a part of last year's AP exam, the remote one, which is terrifying, but they only had to answer this one FRQ. They had an hour to answer, basically, or 45 minutes, effectively, to answer one FRQ question made by Satan, I guess, is how whoever made this question is the devil. But we'll deal with it. The reason why I can tell it's from last year is because it didn't actually specifically say that they had to graph any of these, because on last year's exam, they couldn't take graphs as an answer. But I'm going to draw some stuff, because they'll ask you to draw it on this year's AP exam. So we have, based on the Phillips curve model, is the actual inflation rate greater than, less than, or equal to the expected inflation rate of 4%. Okay? I'm doing this super quick because I wouldn't be graded on it, but I'm going to sort of sketch this as fast and as reasonably as I can. The information that I know about the Phillips curve from the beginning of this is that the expected inflation rate is 4% and the natural rate of unemployment is 2%. Now, most of you should know the LRPC is right there at that natural rate. What you should then realize is that the expected inflation rate will be the inflation rate when you're at the natural rate. It is basically the inflation equivalent of the natural rate. It's what it should be, which would be 4%. But that's not where we are right now. The question asks, is the actual inflation rate going to be that 4%, or is it going to be higher than or less than that? If you're wondering, how would I calculate that? It's not a math problem. It's based on this. They're in a recessionary gap. So if I'm looking on my Phillips curve, I can plot a recessionary gap here. Recessionary gaps are periods of time of very high unemployment. So I would be somewhere like this point, point B on my Phillips curve, a point that is further along the Phillips curve or further down the Phillips curve, because at point B, I would have greater than 2% unemployment, which would be my mark of a recession. Well, if I'm at point B, it sure does look like I would have less inflation than expected, right? Because if I'm at point B, then based on how the shortened Phillips curve works, if I have a higher inflation rate with unemployment, I would have a higher unemployment rate when I'm in a recession. I would have lower inflation. So the answer to this, and this is my best guess, I don't know yet, oh god, that's the biggest circle that's ever been drawn. There we go. Is that it is less than. And how would I explain that without a graph? If I had to verbalize it, I would say because they are in a recessionary gap and the Phillips curve dictates that inflation and unemployment are inversely related, a recession would indicate that there is fairly high unemployment, meaning there should be less than expected inflation. That's how I would explain it. Okay, B, assume the government takes no policy action. I already should be prompted to know what to do here. There's no government action to resolve this. What will happen to the actual, not natural, the actual rate of unemployment in the long run? Explain it. And how will the long run adjustment process be represented on the Phillips curve? Now, reminder, whenever you're doing a Phillips curve problem, because this does end up being a Phillips curve problem with part 2, I should be thinking of my aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph as well. And it mentioned that I was in a recessionary gap, so I should be picturing that small thing. There's no labels on this graph because I'm being very lazy and quick because I'm on a timer here. I should be like right there in a recessionary gap. And if it asks the government's not doing anything, what'll happen in the long run? At least graphically, I know what's going to happen in the long run. My SRAS should shift to the right to get me back to full employment. And if I'm moving back to full employment, my actual unemployment rate should go down. My unemployment rate should be going down. Reason being, if you're below full employment in a recession, in the long run, the economy will self-correct either by businesses lowering wages and hiring more workers to ramp up their productivity, or because due to the lowered inflation rate, we should have less expensive resources, which would also allow you to produce more. Either way, the ability to produce more should allow for businesses to hire more workers, which would mean there is lower unemployment. End of the explanation. 2, how would you show that on the Phillips curve? Again, I don't like that they asked really weird stuff last year because they asked like, how would you show this on the Phillips curve? Not to show it, but how would you show it? Well, how you show this on the Phillips curve is an increase in aggregate supply would make me shift my SRPC. inward, down to the left, this green one. Because at that higher aggregate supply level, if you look at that, I should have a lower price level. So I should go from point B to a point where there is less inflation, because lower price level. And I just said that they have lower unemployment. So lower inflation, lower unemployment, I got to shift my entire Phillips curve left. Now remember that you got to get back to full employment on both. That's sort of the trick. So what'll be shown on the Phillips curve is that you would shift the entire Phillips curve inward, downward, leftward, however you want to phrase that. Decrease the Phillips curve, kind of phrase that however you want to. And your explanation would still be tied to the inflation rate and unemployment rate going down a bit. That as businesses can produce more, prices will start to fall, and as businesses can produce more, they should be able to hire more people, so unemployment should also fall, meaning my Phillips curve should decrease since those are my two axes. I know I'm saying things very quickly here, guys. It's because I'm trying to answer all this in the timer and still explain everything properly. C. Assume that instead of waiting for the long-run adjustment, the government of Skeetersville, which is a terrible name, is considering using fiscal policy to address a recessionary gap. Good for their government. If the government chooses to increase deficit spending, God, I know they're going to bring up the little funds market graph at some point here, calculate the minimum change in government spending required to increase aggregate demand by the amount of the recessionary gap. Okay. They want me to increase AD by this value. I have a formula for this. It's the way we use the spending multiplier. I take the initial change in spending, I multiply by the multiplier, which in this case is the spending multiplier. And it gets me the eventual change in either GDP, income, or, oh hey looky, aggregate demand. So I'm solving for this, although actually I'm not solving for this. I'm solving for the change in government spending. And it says to show my work, so I would have to write all this stuff out. The change in aggregate demand is the amount of the recessionary gap. I need aggregate demand to go up by 240. So my setup here is that it's a change in spending times my multiplier equals 240 billion. Delta S, this is a terrible delta sign, times M equals 240. My multiplier equals 1 over MPS, that's my spending multiplier, which would be 1 over 0.25, which is 4. So it's something times 4 equals 240. If 240 scares you or 240 billion scares you, just make it 24 and then chuck a 0 at the end of your answer. Because 24 divided by 4 is 6. Yep, 6 instead of being 24, it's 240, so this would be 60 billion, to be clear. 60 billion is the answer there. I need to increase government spending by 60 billion to get me that recessionary gap. How would that be shown on my Phillips curve? Okay, I'm kind of undoing the green thing that I drew on this graph because it said that instead of what I said for, what is that, B, that instead we don't do that. The government decides to do a fiscal policy. Okay, well, let's say the government increases spending by 60 billion. Well, if they increase spending, aggregate demand should go up, which on my Phillips curve would mean I move along my Phillips curve towards full employment still. I increase AD, I get a higher price level and lower unemployment. So I get higher inflation rate, lower unemployment rate. That'd be a movement along my Phillips curve, up it. So I would say on my Phillips curve, you should move up along the Phillips curve because by increasing aggregate demand, businesses should be able to hire more workers because of the increased profits, which would reduce unemployment. Good, so I moved left. And by increasing spending, businesses should be able to charge more for their products, so higher prices, higher price level, higher inflation rate. So again, I move up along my Phillips curve because I should get higher inflation and lower unemployment rate as a result of the increased aggregate demand. Okay? 3, if the government chooses to decrease taxes instead of increasing spending, what will be the change in taxes? Oh, God, it's kind of like this. Okay, it's change in taxes times the tax multiplier equals the change in aggregate demand. It is still going to be something times something equals 240. The tax multiplier is different. Sorry for the voice crack. I'm trying to talk a lot here in a short amount of time. I also had to proctor the AP Calculus exam today, which was super chill, and everybody who took it had a fun time. Move myself out of the way so you can see my work. Tax multiplier is negative MPC over MPS. Yes, you have to know the formulas. I've been telling you guys that forever. Stop trying to not do work. Okay. So we got negative MPC over MPS. It is negative 0.75 over 0.25. 0.75 over 0.25 is 3. Something times 3 equals 240. Or, sorry, negative 3. Apologies. Something times negative 3 is 240. Positive 240, it should be mentioned. So this has to be negative. They need to... Oh, and it says, luckily, it says to decrease income taxes. That's very helpful. They need to decrease income taxes by 80 billion. So we have increased government spending by 60 billion or decreased taxes by 80 billion. Either of those would get you the same exact change in overall GDP. Because your tax multiplier is less than your spending multiplier. How long have I spent on this question so far? Only 10 minutes. Dang, I am so fast. So sorry, guys. I'm doing this super quickly. I should slow down. Okay. So I knew it was a multiplier problem because I saw all the stuff when it asked about the multiplier. If it says calculate anything and it's asking about changes in spending or taxes, it's probably a multiplier deal. Especially when they told me that the MPS is 0.25 up here, I should start instantly thinking multiplier. Okay, 4, C4. Jesus, this question sucks. Okay, now suppose instead the government wants to maintain a balanced budget. Idiots. So stupid of them. And it increases both government spending and income taxes by 200 billion. Will this policy make the output gap smaller, make the output gap larger, or have no effect on the output gap? What they mean by output gap, in case you're not sure, is they mean the space between the equilibrium and the long aggregate supply. Like this area is the gap. So if they say make the gap smaller, they mean whatever this is going to actually like move things towards where it's supposed to be. Make the gap larger means make it worse. Have no effect, has no effect. So the idea is this going to help, hurt, do nothing? Weird to phrase it that way. So they increase both government spending and income taxes by 200 billion. I, technically speaking, could do math to help myself here. I don't need to. I know why, but I can show you the math. If I did the math, I would be using these same formulas again. They're telling me the change in spending is 200. They're telling me the change in taxes is 200. But it's an increase in taxes is important. If I increase government spending by 200 with our current situation, that would actually increase GDP by 800 billion, which is more than what I need. If I raise taxes by 200, remember that's bad. If I raise taxes, that would lower GDP by 600. This would be 200 times negative 3. Because if I increase taxes, that actually hurts. They're trying to do both because they don't want the budget to go out of whack. Because if you increase taxes and spending by the same amount, then the government has paid for it effectively. They're not going into a deficit to do this. But if they do it, the change in spending will be more impactful than the change in taxes. I mentioned it was 800 plus and then minus 600. So it is still net positive. It would still decrease the output gap. It would make it so that we get closer to LRAS. We technically wouldn't close the gap, though. That's the problem here. It doesn't tell me, it doesn't ask me about that, which is, I mean, thank God they ask so many questions here. It would help. It wouldn't fix it. The reason why it doesn't have no effect, which is bad English there, the reason why that's not the answer is because when you change spending and change taxes by the same amount, you actually have a large, it's the spending change still wins. The reason being mathematically is that the spending multiplier is bigger, right? 1 over 0.25 is better than negative 0.75 over 0.25. I get 4, I get 3. Like, the spending multiplier is bigger, so a change in spending should do more based on how math works. The logic of it is whenever you change taxes, people save a portion of the change in taxes. For the explanation here, I don't know if I would need to do that to say it. I know I would have to say that a change in taxes wouldn't be as impactful as a change in spending. So raising government spending by 200 and raising taxes by 200 will still make the output gap smaller. You could probably explain it with math if you wanted to be like, okay, well, a change in spending of 200 will get you plus 800 based on our current NPS, and we get minus 2. But that would work with regardless of whatever your NPS is. Whatever your NPS is, you would always have the change in spending will always be more impactful than the change in taxes. Okay, D, suppose the government chose to implement the policy described in Part CI. That's a lot, Jesus Christ. This is the increase in government spending, which is deficit spending, which I knew they were going to ask the loanable funds market because they said deficit spending, and they always freaking connect them. So, based on loanable funds market analysis, which again, based on what happens to your loanable funds market graph, I'm drawing it. What'll happen to the price of previously issued bonds and capital stock. Jesus, okay. So I'm setting this up. It's supply of loans, demand of loans, quantity of loans, and real interest rate. Again, this exam didn't make kids draw these graphs, but guess what, guys? You're taking it in person. You gotta friggin' write and draw your oh my god, my voice. You gotta actually draw your graphs. Oh, I'm so tired. Okay, bye. Loanable funds market graph. Crowding out's happening. Sorry, I gotta sneeze. Okay, crowding out's happening because it said deficit spending. Deficit spending means the government's gonna have to borrow in order to spend, which means there'll be an increased demand for loans. Higher demand for loans means higher real interest rate. I bet that's what they care about. It is what they care about. So we got a higher real interest rate. That's what's going to affect these two things. So the price of previously issued bonds. God, why put this here? This is such a mean thing to ask about at this point. Okay, the price of previously issued bonds and interest rates are inversely related. So here's how, and here's what the explanation would be. What I would write, and then I'll explain it further, is the price of previously issued bonds should go down because as interest rates rise, new bonds will have a higher interest rate and therefore yield a higher return, making older bonds less valuable and fetch a lower price in the market. That's the answer I would write. What I mean by that is, whenever you have interest rates go up, new bonds will be issued with that new interest rate. So your old bonds would be kind of garbage because with a bond, you want the highest interest rate possible. If I could buy a bond from the government with a 50% interest rate, I would do it today. If it was like 3%, I'd be like, I mean, I can make some money off of that, but like, it's not that good. So I won't really care. So whenever they say that interest rates are going up because of the deficit spending, based off what I did on my loanable funds market graph, which was, again, so I got a higher real interest rate. That would make all new bonds better, and therefore all old bonds worse. There is an inverse relationship between interest rates and the price of previously issued bonds. That's the shortcut. But the explanation is because the newer bonds are worth more from a value standpoint, you make more money off of them. So the old bonds would be less valuable and fetch a lower price. Capital stock, well, capital stock is built off of, capital stock is the total amount of capital within your economy. That's part one. And if interest rates are higher, I would not be able to accumulate as much capital because remember that capital is tied to investment spending and investment spending is inversely related to interest rates. So my answer here would be capital stock should decrease because as interest rates go up, businesses can no longer afford to borrow and spend as much and will not be able to acquire as much capital, thereby reducing the amount of total capital stock in the economy. Whew. That is a monster of an FRQ. It's an absolutely emotionally devastating one. Now, last year, they pretty much had 45 minutes for this question. So for this to be your long FRQ, I probably would say they cut out C4, B1 or 2, one of those would be gone, I think, and one of the parts of D. I think they cut out 3 of these little spots. It could be the same as your FRQ this year. Your FRQ this year should not be this many parts from the long FRQ, only because they had 45 minutes to answer this. You guys have 30 to answer a long FRQ. So this is a bit long for a long FRQ. Still worth doing because I get to cover a whole bunch of stuff here, but holy crap, is this a bunch of stuff. Last year's kids still have the same password as the year before, so either they curved the hell out of that thing or I don't know what, but God bless. This is a friggin' monster. If you got questions over any part of that, feel free to type them in the comments below. That was a hell of a lot. Okay, now time for a nice mental relaxing question. The one with all the frickin' math and the GDP deflator in it. Woo. Okay. Now some of these are going to be easier than others. Calculate each of the following for year 2. Show your work. No calculator. Although last year they did have a calculator, so question mark? All right. Real GDP per capita in 1 year, real GDP per capita in another year. Okay. So it's real, that's important to know. These are nominal. I got to do stuff there, and it's per capita. So I'm going to find the real GDP first, and then I'm going to divide by the population. That's all I got to do. So for real GDP, it equals the nominal over the deflator times 100. So for chartless, which terrible names here, although, oh my, wait a minute. Did they call it chartless because that year's because this I think was also from last year's and they didn't have any graphs, so the exam was chartless? I'm gonna freak out. I'm gonna lose my goddamn mind. Okay. All right. So for real GDP, nominal was, oh sorry, it says for year 2. Oof, close call there. 390. That was close. I almost messed that up. That was embarrassing. Over 130, which seems like it's hard. It's not. Times 100. 390 over 130 is 3. That's going to be times, does 13 go into 39? If you're like, I don't know what 39 divided by anything is. It's like 13, 26, 39. Be decent at math. It's 3 times 100. That's just 300. Okay. That's for my real GDP per capita. I got to divide by 20. Cancel the zeros. That's 15. Because 30 divided by 2 is 15. No calculator again. Now, last year's exam, they kind of could use a calculator, but come on, you didn't need to. Real GDP per capita for Davinska, I don't know what that is. There can't be some stupid pun there that I'm not seeing, right? All right, whatever. Nominal over deflator again. Nominal is 700. Deflator is 140. That seems bad. It's not. It's 5. Because again, these kind of have to be doable without a calculator, even if you were supposed to be allowed to do that. Sorry, that's my answer to that one. 5 times 100, so 500. 500 divided by 10 is 50. Yeah, I'm not wrong. 50. Because again, per capita means I'm dividing by population, so it's just 500 divided by the 10. When it says show your work, you do got to show more, or at least like not have it as terribly set up as I do here. You should write the formula, plug in the numbers, get the answer, and then write the formula for real GDP per capita, which is just real GDP divided by population. That's literally all you would write, and then plug in. For showing your work, you do have to be kind of deliberate about it. You don't have to explain to them how 390 divided by 13 is 3, because like it's just 3 of 130, like it's not that complicated. But you do have to set it up for them. Like you have to show, how did you get 3? Oh, I did 390 divided by 130. Got it. That kind of thing. Hello, Archer. If Chartless and Davinskia have the same velocity of money, sweet God, which must have a higher money supply in year 2. This is a quantity theory of money problem. I don't have room to really write what I want to write here, so I'm going to do my whiteboard. Archer, stop licking me, please. He is licking my feet. It is gross. Okay. The quantity theory of money is M times V equals P times Y. It's that formula. It is the money supply times the velocity of money equals price level times real output. However, P times Y is nominal GDP. So really, it's money supply times velocity of money equals nominal GDP. All right. So I got this. Question's telling me that they both have the same exact velocity of money. Sick. All right. And it's asking me which one has a higher money supply, which means if V is the same and they're asking who has the higher money supply, they're really asking who has the higher nominal GDP. And I can look at this table and tell you, in year 2, I'm pretty sure Davinskia does, because 700 is bigger than 390. So it should be Davinskia. Why? according to the quantity theory of money, if you multiply the money supply by the velocity of money, it should get you the nominal GDP. Since they have the same velocity of money and Davinskaya has a higher nominal GDP, it should also have a higher money supply. That's my explanation. So according to the quantity theory of money, although if you didn't say according to the quantity theory of money, I think we should be fine. Then if money supply times velocity equals nominal GDP, then that's whatever. That's just explaining a formula thing. Calculate the inflation rate in year 2 for Chartless and Davinskaya. Inflation rate equals, oh god, I can't write this. I can't do that with my mouse. It is the rate of change of the GDP deflator or the rate of change of CPI. Meaning, it is GDP deflator of year 2 minus year 1 over year 1 times 100. I take the GDP deflator of the second year minus the first year over the first year times 100. Now, that sounds terrifying. It's super easy here, actually, because these are my GDP deflators for year 2 and year 1. So if I'm doing it for Chartless, for example, my setup would be 130 minus 100 over 100 times 100. That's the setup for Chartlesses. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty confident that times 100 and minus 100 are gonna cancel. They do. So that would mean that my math here that I'm actually doing is 130 minus 100. And guys, I can do that. 30% would be my answer for Chartless. I do the exact same thing for Davinskaya, where it would be 140 minus 100 over 100 times 100. Again, the last two things would cancel. So it's just 140 minus 100, and that's just 40%. I better not be wrong on those. I'll be real pissed. Okay, so I got 30%, 40%, bah. And this is my work for the Chartless one. I would do the same thing for Davinskaya, but I have a 140 instead of the 130 there. And I would solve it a little bit, but that's about it. D, based on your answer to part C, if the nominal interest rate is the same in both, who would have a higher real interest rate? Technically, this is the Fisher equation, which should be real equals nominal minus inflation rate. So we are trying to, and this is for the rate here, we're trying to find the nominal interest rate is the same for both, so don't worry about it. Who has the higher real interest rate would be whoever has the lower inflation rate, which logically makes sense because if you had a higher level of inflation, you would have a lower real value of basically anything because real adjusts for that. So I would say that whoever has the lower inflation rate is Chartless. I hope I'm right, and every time I write the word Chartless now, I will recognize that they literally meant that this exam is Chartless. I don't know what this is supposed to be, but God, I'm annoyed that I didn't pick up on the Chartless thing before. Okay, so again, it's real equals nominal minus inflation. They said that the nominal is the same for both, so whatever it is, say it's 10%. Then the real interest rate would be higher if you had a lower inflation rate. Yeah. Because like if it was 10 minus 30, I'd get negative 20. If it was 10 minus 40, I'd get negative 30. Negative 20 is higher than negative 40, so Chartless. Okay. E, based on your answer to part C, double I. So specifically this guy. Okay, so 40%. If the expected inflation rate was 10%, what would be the effect on real GDP as the... Oh my God, it's a long-run self-adjustment question. Why would you do this? Okay. What would be the effect on real GDP as the economy adjusts to its long-run equilibrium? I'm going to graph this, I guess. I don't want to draw both aggregate demand supply curve and Phillips curve to explain this to you guys, but be aware that a Phillips curve would kind of be helpful here. I'm not going to use it because I need to do the long-run self-adjustment. So my actual inflation rate, now luckily the last question helps because we just did something like this. My expected inflation rate was 10%. My actual inflation rate was 40. What does that sound like? It sounds like this is bad. It sounds like that's a lot more inflation than they thought. They're probably in an inflationary gap, or a positive output gap for those of you that learned it that way, which means that my graph would look like this. Doesn't make me draw it. It should, though. Okay. Man, this question's terrible, too. These last year AP exam questions were friggin' hard. Okay. So this is what my graph should look like if I was doing an aggregate demand supply graph. Doesn't tell me to do that, but it asks about real GDP, which is on that graph, so probably important. Okay. Adjusts to its long run equilibrium. Yet again, I will tell you, if it asks about the long run equilibrium and it's not saying anything about the government fixing it, whenever you're doing that, it is the aggregate supply curve that is shifting. So I'm shifting it, in this case, I'd be shifting it left. And it's shifting specifically to get back to equilibrium. So I'm going to be shifting my SRAS to the left to get back to full employment. It's like that. So what will be happening to my real GDP? It'll be dropping. Real GDP should fall. Since oh god, okay, here's how I explain this. Okay. In the long run, as businesses start to raise wages to compensate for the inflation, remember, there's like 40% inflation here. They should be paying the workers a lot more. They will have to scale back their amount of employees. They'll have to lay off some workers here, which will overall hurt their ability to produce and drop the real GDP. That would work as an explanation. That's not a terribly long one. Okay. That's the second FRQ. How long did that one take me? About 12 minutes or so. Okay. You're trying to do these questions in about 10 to 15 minutes if you can. And it's a lot of that was because of explaining things. And then the last one, which is mostly a graph question, and this is not from last year's exam, so it actually asked people to draw things, which, good, your exam will look a lot more like this question than the last two. So if that makes you feel a lot better, good, it should. So they sell bonds on the open market. Assume that banks in Sewell have no excess reserves. Good for them. What is the effect of the central market's action on the amount of customer loans that banks in Sewell can make? I don't know. This question is worded kind of bad. If this is a short run or a long run thing, I might just write both to be safe. If they currently have no excess reserves, banks shouldn't be able to lend out kind of anything right now. So I would say initially, banks have already lent out all of their money, so they can't lend out any additional amounts. However, due to the money multiplier effect, the central bank selling bonds should decrease the money supply, because the Federal Reserve selling bonds is a contractionary monetary policy, which will decrease the overall amount of money that the banks can lend out in the long term, or eventually. I would probably write both, just to cover my bases here, because this question did a bad job of saying what is the initial effect, or what is the... Since it doesn't say initial effect, I would probably interpret that to mean it is talking about the eventual effect, because it didn't say initial, and initial is probably the more used word there if they're trying to like really catch you on the they can't learn anything right now. So I would assume this is more about the eventual effect, but I would write both just to be safe. It's like, screw it, I can write both. I know both. I know initially it shouldn't be able to lend out anything because it has no excess reserves, but I also know that eventually it should be able to lend out less because of the contractionary monetary policy. Remember, I taught the class, so I'm pretty smart. Now, B, correctly labeled money market graph. Oh yeah, baby, you want to grade me on graphing? I can do that any day. Love graphs. Graphs are the best. Easiest source of points on the AP exam. If you can't graph, though, it's the most sad way to not pass an AP exam is you couldn't draw a freaking graph. It's like, I get it if you can't do calculus. Calculus is friggin' impossible all the time. You can draw a graph. So we got the money market graph, which is this bad boy. Looks like that. Supply of money, demand for money, quantity of money, nominal interest rate. Which, if you forgot that it was nominal interest rate, hey, look right there. It says it. God, that's helpful. Okay. So show what this thing does to the money market graph. Well, all right. It should be contractionary monetary policies, so it should decrease the money supply. Because, again, contractionary monetary policy decreases the money supply. If the Fed is selling bonds on the open market, who'd be buying them? Oh, us. Oh, also banks. So they have less money now. They've got a bunch of bonds, but those aren't money. Bonds are just like a cool asset. That's sick. I bought a bunch of stock. That's not money. Money supply decreases. All right. So that's my thing. Show the effect on the interest rate. I didn't label things well enough. I would have lost points. Okay. Quantity at equilibrium. Quantity 1. Interest rate at equilibrium. Interest rate 1. Archer is yet again licking my leg, which is just gross. Here we go. That's how I would show it. Look at all my good labels. Apologies that I didn't do it the first time. That's what I should have done. I'm an idiot. There we go. C. What is the effect of the central bank's action on each of the following in Sewell? Price level, okay, and real interest rate. Explain. Okay. Price level is an aggregate demand supply curve thing. So if there is a lower money supply, then on my aggregate demand supply curve, usually what's happening is there is now that higher interest rate, so investment spending would drop. It's going to cost more for us to borrow. And if I have lower aggregate demand, which this is the smallest graph in the history of the world, if I have less aggregate demand, my price level at equilibrium should fall. So that bad boy is going to go down. Oh my God, that's a lot. There we go. Price level should fall. Doesn't say to explain it. Sick, leaving it. Now, to be clear, on the AP exam, what you should write for your answer isn't a downward pointing arrow. I am trying to answer with my mouse on this, so for the love of God, don't write what I'm writing on the screen here. Listen to what I'm saying. I would say the price level should fall. I would write that sentence. The price level will fall, or should fall. Okay. Real interest rate and explain. All right. Archer, please leave me alone. Real interest rate is on my loanable funds market graph. But why, Minkridge, you just drew a money market. Why are you making us do 3 graphs in one question? Because the AP exam asked you to. Because I frickin' love graphs. So, on the loanable funds market, doing a monetary policy also affects this graph. It's the one with real interest rate on it. And it does actually the exact same thing. It decreases the supply. Because if we're talking supply and demand of loans, and the idea is that the banks are buying a bunch of bonds. If the banks have a bunch of bonds, what can they now not do as well? They can't lend as much, so the supply of loans should be decreasing. Archer, please stop. He did stop when I asked him politely. That was nice. Supply should decrease. Real interest rate should go up. Now, you can probably tackle this one of 2 ways. You could be talking about the fact that the nominal interest rate went up and the price level went down, which would mean that there's less inflation, so that even more of an impact should happen to real interest rate. So if you wanted to go down like that Fisher equation kind of deal, you could. I would probably have just said that since banks will now have less money to lend out, they will end up charging an overall higher interest rate on loans and offering a higher rate of return on savings, meaning the overall real interest rate should be going up. Yeah. Now you might want to reference like the price level is going down here, so there's less inflation. So if nominal went up and there's even less inflation, then there's real interest rate going like crazy. And then D, given your answer to part C double I, this is why they asked about real interest rate. What's happening to the value of their currency? The oh no. Okay. The Apollo oh no. That's a reference for nobody your age. You guys don't know the Olympics from that back then. So, there is a higher real interest rate in Sewell. What will be happening internationally? Okay, well, international value of currency stuff, foreign exchange market, people want to invest where there is a higher interest rate internationally. So, foreigners would want to invest in Sewell because the foreigners can make money off that high interest rate. They can buy bonds from Sewell. They can put their money in Sewell's banks. They can buy stocks and earn more off of dividends in Sewell. That high interest rate is sick if you're a foreigner trying to make bank off of Sewell. So what will happen to the value of the ONO? The ONO should appreciate. Why? Well, if people from other countries invest more into Sewell, they will need to acquire the ONO to do so. There'd be a higher overall demand for ONOs, meaning that the value of the ONO is appreciating or going up. As the demand goes up, the value of it goes up. What's my time check? 5:16. Did I start these at like 5:30? I started at 5:30-ish. 5:32 is when I started it. I used about 5 minutes to do my reading, which was just me literally highlighting stuff. I wasn't actually reading it. I was sort of just highlighting so I knew what stuff I would need to do. Solve through 3 FRQs, one of which is probably a bit longer than it needed to be. Or that's going to be for you guys, because it was one of last year's, and those ones felt, I think, a little longer. In general. Well, 2 of them from last year, so I don't know why that second one was so short. Whatever. But yeah, there's 3 FRQs. On your AP exam, the timing window you're looking for is if you kind of ignore the reading time, or at least you like combine the 15 and the 10 into a total of 60 minutes, you should try to spend about 30 minutes on the long FRQ, which when you look back at this question, The first question that I did, hell yeah, it should that thing should take you about 30. Like, I did that in 15 to 20 minutes. I work incredibly fast, and I know this content super well. For any of my students, this thing's going to take them, I probably would expect them to take an entire class period to do this problem. It's a monster. And then your short FRQs, which this is a little long for a short FRQ, but not that bad because the math here is very easy. Probably about 15 minutes for each of them. This one definitely 15 minutes is like, you shouldn't be spending more than 15 minutes on this question. That should be very fast. So it's 30, 15, 15 for your FRQs. And again, it's 10 minutes of reading time, 50 minutes of writing time, but you can start answering in that first 10 minutes. Now I'm going to start going through the answers here just to make sure that I did this right. I feel like I did. I'm fairly confident that I did. But if I'm wrong, I get to be embarrassed and you guys get to make fun of me. So let's do that. So for part A, it says that the actual inflation rate is less than expected because there's a recessionary gap. Yep, that's what I said. That's right. I said that thing was lower. You can't see my answers anymore, but if you go back in time, you can double check me. I know I'm not wrong on that. B, what will happen to the actual rate of unemployment? I said that in the long run, since there's a recessionary gap, unemployment should go down. Good, because I said that businesses will probably start to lower wages, hire more workers, ramp up their productivity to increase SRAS. Ha-ha. Get back to full employment. Ha-ha. All that's good. Second one says, how will that be represented on the Phillips curve? I said that you would, because you're increasing supply, you would decrease the Phillips curve. They move in opposite directions. So shift it to the left, bingo. And because of the wages price thing, okay, they literally allowed for any of them. That's very nice. Will cause the Phillips curve to shift left until everything goes back to full employment equilibrium. Yeah, until we get back to full employment on both. Okay. So that's 1 and 2. Those were all good. Part C has 4 parts. Jesus Christ, guys. Okay. So I said for the first one that the change in government spending should be 60 billion. And there's my work. Oh, that's a weird way to phrase it. Because they did the change in spending times the multiplier equals the change in GDP, but they algebra'd around. That's fine. I don't feel like that's wrong. 2 says, how will that be shown on the Phillips curve? I said it would move up along the Phillips curve because it'll increase aggregate demand. Yep, that's what I said. Great. What is the change in taxes that would be needed instead? Said 80. It would need to lower taxes by 80 billion. Blah, 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 blah. I'm incredible. This is good for my ego. At least in confidence, making sure I know what I'm doing for my job. 4 was the hard one to explain. I said that it should make the output gap smaller. I'm really hoping I have this right in my head, how they're phrasing things. And I said that's because whenever you change spending, it'll have a larger impact than the change in taxes because people save a portion of their change in taxes is the technical logic of it. Oh boy. Okay, so an equal increase will result in an increase in real... Oh, they didn't even ask you to explain that. That's very nice. That's so friggin' helpful. Or the effect from the spending increase is more powerful than the tax increase, or the spending multiplier is greater than the tax multiplier. Cool. None of them required you to explain why that is, which is very helpful because that's like an extra 2 lines of text at least. So that's very cool. It was just like, as long as you write that like the government spending and income taxes will actually increase GDP, you're good. That's barely an explanation, but fine. Whatever, I was right, but all right. I would have made it harder. That sucks. I mean, okay. I said that loanable funds market should have a higher interest rate, so the price of previously issued bonds should go down because now they're worth less in terms of value. Decrease, because they are inversely related. Sure. I mean, that's stupid. You should explain how they're inversely related. That's really annoying, but fine. They really let you guys off the hook with this. And the increase in government spending will increase real interest rate by... You don't have to explain that, though, did they? They technically didn't ask you to explain... I guess because they didn't have you draw D. I had us draw D. If you didn't draw D, you would have had to explain why you knew the real interest rate would be going up, so that's fair. I didn't do that, but I drew it. So maybe I missed a point there. States the capital stock will decrease and explains that the increase in government spending will increase real interest rates. Again, this is the demand for loanable funds thing, which this is not the explanation for this. This is the explanation for this. Sequence there, and the answer is actually kind of not good. But the higher interest rate will reduce private investment spending on plant and equipment, which just means capital, and will reduce the capital stock. So that's Outside of maybe I would lose a point here for not explaining how this happened, but frankly, had you drawn loanable funds market graph here, which you couldn't have on the AP exam last year because you literally couldn't submit drawings, but if this was your exam question this year and you drew a loanable funds market graph in D just to sort of show what you were thinking, I think you actually would have been fine like doing what I did for I and double I. So that's a difference on how the AP exam questions were. I didn't get the question wrong from like a logic standpoint, but you guys can nitpick if you want. Okay, 2, let's see what the answers are. I had real GDP per capita was 15 and 50. Am I crazy here? Oh my god, I'm so smart. Yes, because it was 390 divided by 130, so 3 times 100, which is 300, divided by 20, which is 15, because 300 divided by 20 is constant zeros, 30 divided by 2, so it's 15. 700 divided by 140, which seems very scary, but 14 times 5 is 70, which you might not know that off the top of your head, but you should. Your math teacher should teach you better. 700 divided by 140 is 5, 5 times 100 is 500, 500 divided by 10 is 50, boom, math. Okay, said that really fast. Hopefully no one's listening at double speed. That would suck to do. Okay, B, I said that Davinskia should have a higher one because they have a higher nominal GDP. And because the quantity theory of money, they have the same velocity of money and they have a higher nominal GDP, so they should have a higher money supply. Blah. Did that right too. Question C. Inflation rate in Chartless was 30%. Inflation rate in Davinskia was 40%. It did the GDP deflator rate of change formula. 130 minus 100 over 100 times 100. Cancel that. It is just that. 30, 40. Easy. Okay, hopefully you can see that. It's very small font on the answers there. Apologies. Part D, if the nominal rate is the same, who has the higher real interest rate? I believe I said Chartless because they had a lower inflation rate, and it would have been like nominal minus inflation equals real. Chartless. And it even says the formula, real interest rate is equal to nominal minus the inflation rate. God. Again, it'd be very scary if I got these wrong. I am teaching the class. That is my oven. Don't freak out. I'm prepping dinner. Based on your answer to part C double I, if the expected inflation rate it was 10%, what would be the effect on real GDP as they adjust to long equilibrium? I said they were in an inflationary gap. So real GDP should go down because aggregate supply will decrease. I'm not looking at the thing. I'm trying to like not look at it. So I said that aggregate supply will decrease to get back from the inflationary gap. They'll probably pay their workers more, lay off people, all that stuff. GDP will decrease, but yes, I'm so good. Aggregate supply will shift to the left. Until I mean, I guess they didn't even you don't have to explain why it shifts to the left. That's very chill. But that's why it's decreasing. Oh, that's so nice of them to not make you explain more than you have to. That's annoying. They should make you explain more than that. Okay, I'm gonna go take something out of my oven really quickly. You guys, look at this question real quick. Sorry about that, students. I did not get to eat lunch today because I was proctoring the calc exam and we didn't have a sub for some reason. So I'm starving and I'm cooking dinner while I'm doing this. So it's all in the oven. It's fine. Nothing's burning. I'll tell you if I die. Okay. Central Bank of Country of Sewell sells bonds open market. That is contractionary policy. So money supply should be decreasing. I said that I kind of gave 2 answers to A to cover my bases because I'm right if I do that. But just be safe. They just they don't make you explain anything here. It just decreases. Yeah, the reason why I would say that that's probably what they were going for is that usually on these AP exam questions, if they want you to answer that there is no change to loans or something like that, they'll say the word initially. And they'll like emphasize it. What is the initial effect? Immediately. If they don't tell you, if they're being vague, they're probably meaning eventually. It's kind of annoying they don't say, which is why I answered with both. They would not have taken 1 points off for me doing what I did. Because I explained it, which doesn't say to explain here. I don't have to explain anything. But if I was to write what I was trying to write, which is cover my bases, I super have to explain it. Because I can't say it doesn't change, though it might decrease. Like, that's not an answer. I would say, like, initially it doesn't change because banks can't lend on anything. But eventually, as the money multiplier effect happens, then the money supply goes down, so they wouldn't be able to loan out as much. That would work. Terrible. B, money market graph should be a decreased money supply. Blah, blah, blah. Look at that. Great. If you write supply of money or MSMD, that is both fine. There's nominal interest rate. I got a higher nominal interest rate. Yep, that's exactly right. 2 points because I did everything, labeled everything right. I did. Okay. Took me a while. I almost messed up and didn't see that I labeled my equilibriums. That's why you double check your answers. C, price level should be going down because there should be a decrease in aggregate demand. Hello? It doesn't say to explain it. Real interest rate should be going up because banks will have less money to lend out. Oh, sure. Or as I said, you could do this where you say the nominal interest rate goes up and there's lower price levels, so you should definitely have a higher real interest rate. They probably would have given you the point for the loanable funds market graph explanation. I think they would, because that is a correct way to do it. But this is also for sure right, because nominal went up and inflation's even lower, so like really high real interest rate. And then D, I said that their currency should be appreciating in value because of the foreign investment. Yeah, because of the higher demand for their financial assets. You want to buy more bonds, you want to buy more stocks. I literally said that. I'm so good at this class. I didn't miss a single thing on any of these problems. Maybe that first part I won. Okay, back to the full camera so I can explain everything what I just talked about. That was a lot. I warned you. It was going to be a lot. I picked some hard FRQs. I think the last one, 3, is probably the most appropriate level of difficulty. We're like, that's not impossible. It's not super crazy. 1 and 2 might be harder for some of you guys because you forgot formulas. You just got to know them. I'm super sorry. You got to know the formula for real GDP using a deflator. It's nominal over deflator times 100. That's it. You got to know the formula for inflation rate. Bummer if you don't. You miss questions on the AP exam if you don't. I'm so sorry. No more stuff. Can't help you if you don't know information. Same with the graphs. Like, you have to know how to label and draw those. Apologies, but you got to. If you don't want to pass the AP exam, cool. Don't memorize things. So don't know your vocab for the psych exam. See what happens. You'll fail. But if you know all that stuff, you can do a lot of the things. Again, the first FRQ here was a lot. It's a lot. It's just a lot. But when I see things like it's in a recession, I can go off of a lot of stuff off of that. Like, okay, I know they're in a recession, so I know my Phillips curve, I should be here. What is this expected inflation rate deal? Why is it asking about that? Oh, because their inflation rate should be 4%, but they're in a recession, so it's lower than that. Oh, stuff like that. If I see MPS, I know it's a multiplier problem. I'm going to get those formulas out. So that reading time is good for a couple of things. I use the reading time so I can quickly mark down or teeny tiny baby sketch a graph, like money market, vertical supply curve, like things like that. And then I also use it to see if I need any formulas. So that's what I was doing when I was highlighting things. I was like, okay, they want me to talk about selling bonds. Okay, got to think about that. I need to be able to draw the money market. Got it. I need to be able to draw the loan funds market. Got it. I need to be able to know what the multiplier stuff is. Got it. And having all that stuff down, writing all those formulas really quickly on the sheet, especially this year where they have the free responses are in one packet and your answers are in another, I would be using probably not 10, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to just sort of underline or circle things that are going to matter, okay, money market graph, got it. Do a teeny baby sketch there so I know, okay, when I get to that graph and I have a brain fart, I've already got the money market graph quick, okay, vertical supply curve, downward sloping demand curve, all of that stuff. Archer is very mean today. He wants lots of attention, I guess. All that stuff. So there's a lot. I know. It's a mock test. It has been exactly an hour, so I definitely didn't run out of time on it. And I explained every answer, which I do not need to do on the AP exam. You don't have, if it doesn't say to explain it, you don't have to explain it. You saw some of their answer choices. It just said decrease, because price level, it went down. Why? Technically it went down because it's a decrease in aggregate demand, and that's how I figured that out. But I don't have to write that. I did have to think it, though. So me explaining all that is good, because that's what's going on in my head. At real speed, actually, because this is the first time for me solving all of these problems. I think that last question I have used in class before. I did not remember that when I picked it, so I was answering all those ones fresh. But I think that wasn't one of my, or it was a kid's question on an AP exam they asked about at some point. Okay, I'll give you Archer on camera because he got a haircut, and so did I, but he got a smaller one. Archer, come here. Come on, let me put you on the camera. Oh boy, oh my god. Oh, he's so small now. Oh. He looks like he hates this. Well, look at the camera. Yep. You can see all of his dots way better when he's got that short hair. Oh. Ow. Scratches. Bless you. But yeah, that is it for today. Oh my god, that was a lot. My brain hurts. Okay, Thursday. Thursday's video is me doing what is called a 6-graph shift problem. Disclaimer, AP exam won't ask you to draw 6 graphs in one problem. That would be mean. And we all know College Board isn't mean. But I'll do it so I can show you guys how every graph in the course is connected. Because if you're looking at these FRQs, I mean, the third FRQ, which is a short one, basically has you do money market, aggregate demand supply curve, loanable funds market if you wanted to, and a Forex market graph. You only had to draw the money market graph. But to figure out most of the answers, you have to understand the other 3. On the first question here, it asks you to do a Phillips curve, an aggregate demand supply graph, a loanable funds market graph. Yeah, all 3 of those. And the second one also asked about an aggregate demand supply graph. So knowing where these connections are is crazy important. So seeing me go through a problem that'll hit from the Forex market to the loanable funds market, to the aggregate demand supply curve, to the Phillips curve, to the money market, to the production possibilities curve, it's really good to see that. And it's a really good test of how well do you get all of the graphs. Because if you can do a 6-graph shift problem, the AP exam can't make you graph a thing that you don't know how to do. Because you'll kind of have to know how to do everything for you to handle a 6-graph problem. So it's sort of like your highest level of like checking your skill. But that's what we'll be doing on Thursday. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I gotta go get the stuff out of the oven and cook the rest of my dinner.